All right, let's talk about the Indian Union budget. It can seem super complicated, right? All this jargon and these massive numbers. Well, today we're going to cut through all of that. We're going to give you a simple, clear breakdown of the nation's finances for 2026-27 using the government's own numbers. So let's just dive right in. It's the one question we all ask ourselves, isn't it? We pay our taxes, but then what? Where does that money actually end up? And for that matter, where does the rest of the government's money even come from? Well, this budget tells that whole story. And believe me, it is a massive one.
Just to give you a sense of the scale we're dealing with, the government plans to spend a total of 53.47 lakh crore rupees this year. Now, a number that big is, well, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. So to make it all make sense, we're going to shrink it down. We're going to look at the entire budget through the lens of a single rupee.
First up, let's follow the money. We're going to trace the journey of every single rupee that finds its way into the government's pocket. So where does it all come from? Okay, so think of this chart as that 1 rupee broken down into 100 paisa. Each slice of this donut shows us exactly where each little piece comes from. Let's take a closer look at the biggest chunks.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. The biggest single source, making up 24 paisa of every rupee, isn't actually tax. It's from borrowings. Yeah, loans. We're going to circle back to that in just a minute. After that, we've got the taxes we all know about. Income tax, what we pay, that's 21 paisa. Corporation tax from company profits adds another 18 paisa, and GST brings in 15 paisa. Just those sources make up the vast majority of the government's income.
Okay, so that's how the rupee comes in. Now for the other side of the equation. Where does that same rupee go? Let's follow the money back out. And here it is. This is where every single rupee is spent. You can think of this as a visual map of the nation's priorities. Every slice tells a story about what we're obligated to pay for and where we're choosing to invest for the future. So the biggest expense, at 22 paisa, is actually money that's sent right back to the states to fund their own local projects. But look at that second biggest slice. 20 paisa goes to interest payments. Remember all that borrowing we saw on the income side? Well, this is the cost. This is the bill we have to pay on all those past loans. After that, 17 paisa goes towards big national-level programs run by the central government. So we've seen that the biggest source of income is borrowing, and one of the biggest expenses is paying the interest on it. It's a bit like a national credit card. So what happens when what you plan to spend is more than what you earn? Let's look at the hard numbers. This slide really lays it out there starkly. On the left, you have the government's total income, and that's without any new borrowing. On the right is the total planned spending. As you can see pretty clearly, there's a very big gap between the two. And that gap? It has a name, the fiscal deficit. It's simply the amount of money the government has to borrow in a single year just to make up the difference. And that number, nearly 17 lakh crore rupees, is the exact amount we saw earlier as borrowings on the income chart. It's literally the government's credit card bill for the year. Now, a number that huge can sound pretty alarming, but context is everything here. Economists like to measure the deficit not in just raw numbers, but as a percentage of the entire country's economy, or GDP. And when you look at it that way, you can see a positive trend. The deficit is actually projected to shrink, which is generally seen as a good sign of improving financial health. Okay, so we've looked at the big picture, the income, the expenses, the deficit. But how does this massive financial plan actually affect our daily lives? Let's connect these giant numbers to the real world. So here's where the rubber really meets the road. Nearly 6 lakh crore rupees are set aside for transport. That's the new highways, bridges, and railway lines you see. Almost the same huge amount goes to defense. Over 2.7 lakh crore for rural development, with big chunks also dedicated to education and health. This is where the budget stops being abstract numbers and starts becoming the stuff we all use. In the end, that's what a budget really is. It's not just a spreadsheet. It's a story. It's a story written in numbers that tells us about our national priorities, how we're trying to balance what we need right now with the investments we have to make for the future. And that brings us to the final and maybe most important question. Now that you've seen the breakdown, where the money comes from and where it goes, what do you think our nation's biggest priority should be? Is it paying down that debt, investing more in healthcare, or something else entirely? The numbers tell one story, but the next chapter, well, that's always up for debate.